Got a question from YouTube. I think this is a good, very relevant question. Are you able to game while also focusing on financial/career goals? Have you ever had to take breaks from gaming to get things done? Yeah, I've definitely had different phases in my learning game experience, right? So I've had periods where I focused on game and it hurt other things I was doing in life. I've had periods where I stopped doing game to focus on other things in my life. And I've had periods where I've kind of done both together. Now for me, doing both together is an interesting proposition because doing game and doing my career are related at the moment, although that's not always been the case. So I'll tell you about a few different periods. First period was when I was learning game. I was a academic, I don't want to say academic superstar, but I was academically pretty strong going into college and had a good GPA, doing things very, very well. And then I discovered pickup and girls, and my GPA went from something like 3.7 to about 2.4. And I graduated with a very low GPA. But I graduated with a lot of knowledge of how to meet girls, and it ended up turning into a career for me. So yeah, that was a period where I definitely let game get in the way of other things I was doing, i.e. my academics. On the other hand, when I became a professional poker player, the period where I was learning poker, I was completely and utterly obsessed with poker and with getting good and making money, and that was my focus, that was my whole thing. And so during that period, I was completely obsessed with poker, obsessed with getting my finances together, making money, and I basically didn't go out. Fortunately for me, and this is kind of gets to the crux of the answer to this question, fortunately for me, I was already at a high level in game at that time. I had already been in game for several years. I'd already been a pickup instructor prior to doing that. And so even though I went out only, I think like one year I went out 3 times the entire year, but every single time I went out, I met a new girl who became like my girlfriend or like a girl who I hooked up with for months. So I was already a high level. And then even when I didn't go out that much for a period of time, when I started going out again, I got it back very quickly. Whereas early on in college, I didn't have a really good foundation in game, and had I not been going out, had I not developed the habit, that would have really held me back in growing. And so a lot of guys ask, like, should I focus in game? Should I focus on other things in my life? What's the balance? I think that up to a certain period in game, if you want to get good at game, you have to really put in the time. You have to put in the time, put in the effort, you have to do the sets, and you have to really make it a habit and make it something that's standard that you do in your life. At a certain point, when you get to good in game, when you reach at least a certain threshold level, you can take time off and you will get a little rusty, but fundamentally you still have done enough game in your life that it's a habit for you. You've still done enough game in your life that you're not going to completely forget it and be back to square zero. And you're not going to get back like that crippling approach anxiety where you're like, will I ever do another approach again? So I think it's important almost for every man to get to at least a threshold value in game where you know that you can do it and you know you can learn it. And that gives you, I think, the freedom to take some time and work on other things and know that you can come back to it, right? And if you have gotten to that level, and also if you've developed the processes and habits of learning that got you to that level, then it becomes very easy to go back to it, right? Another time that I had recently, I won't get into the drama aspect of this, but when I had the parting of ways from my former business partner, there was a period of time where I wasn't really in field because I was so focused on, you know, the egregious shit that was happening to me. And so during that time, I wasn't really in field, but when I went back out, it took me 1 day to get sharp again. Right? I went out for 1 day and it was really frustrating and awful, and then I made a couple tweaks, and by the end of that day and into the next day, all of a sudden my game was back, and I've been good ever since. And so what happens is that the further you get, the higher level you get at game, the faster you get it back. And you don't have to be a slave to it. You don't have to approach every girl you ever see. You don't have to go out every single day once you reach a threshold. But in reaching that threshold, you do. You do have to put in, you know, a decent amount of effort to earn that right to step away and still have your game stay there. So again, what are the takeaways here? What are the takeaways? One, just because you decide to do game hard doesn't mean that you're committed and you always have to do every set for all of your life and you can never take time off or you'll lose it. That's not true. And a lot of guys get this idea about relationships, that like if they get in a relationship, they'll lose their game. It's not true. Being in a relationship is actually good for your game in its own right. And if you got good at game the right way and you know a process and develop the habits, you can certainly do that exact same thing after the relationship, and 95% of it will come back like that. 5% may take a little while, no big deal if it does. right? And should I focus on my business or keep working on game? Well, if it's a good business opportunity that's not going to come along again, focus on the business and then come back to game. It's fine. But again, in order to do that, you have to get to that threshold value. If you've never done a cold approach, you're scared of talking to girls, you're a virgin, whatever, that kind of stuff, well, that's a time when maybe you need to get this thing handled. And if you say, oh, I'll fix it when I get my weight handled, I'll fix it when I get my business handled, at that point you're probably just making excuses, and what you're probably going to do is never get it handled. So be realistic and honest with yourself. Assess where you're actually at. If you've done the work, you can take some time off and come back to it. If you haven't done the work, you're probably making excuses.